The sound of shattering glass echoed through the saloon as Willow Jenkins ducked behind the piano, her heart pounding like a steam locomotive. She hadn't been in Silvercreek for more than 2 hours before witnessing her first barroom brawl, and if the rumors about the man at the center of it were true, she'd just laid eyes on the most dangerous man in the territory. It was 1876, and the West was still wild, especially in the silver mining town of Silvercreek, Colorado. Willow had arrived on the afternoon stage, dust-covered and weary from the 3-day journey from Denver. Her uncle's letter had been clear. He needed help with his general store and offered her a fresh start away from a past that had grown too painful to bear. "That's him," whispered the piano player, a thin man with yellowed teeth who had joined Willow in her improvised shelter. "That's Zane Maddox." Willow peered over the top of the piano. The man in question stood amid the wreckage of tables and chairs, his broad shoulders squared beneath a worn leather vest, dark hair falling across his forehead. Unlike the other brawlers who were red-faced and shouting, Zane Maddox was eerily calm, which somehow made him appear even more menacing. "I've heard he's killed 20 men," the piano player continued, clearly enjoying having an audience for his gossip. "Some say he can outdraw any gunslinger from here to Texas." Willow's mouth went dry. She'd heard similar stories on the stagecoach tales of Zane Maddox, the rancher with the fastest gun and coldest heart in the territory. They said he'd come to Silvercreek 5 years ago, bought a struggling ranch outside of town, and kept mostly to himself except for occasional forays into town that often ended exactly like this. The sheriff burst through the saloon doors, his badge glinting in the late afternoon sunlight. "That's enough, Maddox. I've had it with your disturbances." Zane straightened, brushing dust from his sleeves with a casual grace that belied the tension in the room. "Wasn't my doing, Sheriff. These men took exception to my presence. I don't care whose fault it is. You're paying for damages, and I want you out of my town for at least a week." Something flickered across Zane's face, frustration, perhaps, but he nodded curtly and reached into his pocket. Willow couldn't help but notice how the sheriff's hand hovered near his gun until Zane produced nothing more threatening than a leather pouch. He counted out several coins and placed them on the bar. "That should cover it," he said, his voice lower and softer than Willow had expected from a man of his reputation. As Zane turned to leave, his gaze swept the saloon and, for a breathless moment, locked with Willow's. His eyes were a startling blue, not cold as she'd imagined, but tired, almost sad. Then he was gone, the batwing doors swinging in his wake. "You can come out now, miss," the sheriff called, helping to right overturned chairs. "Sorry about the welcome to Silvercreek. We're not usually quite so exciting." Willow smoothed her travel-worn skirts as she emerged from behind the piano. "I'm looking for George Jenkins' store. He's my uncle, old George. Sure, it's just down the street, east side, can't miss it." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Name's Roberts. Welcome to town, miss." "Jenkins, Willow Jenkins." "Well, Miss Jenkins, word of advice, best steer clear of Zane Maddox." "Man's nothing but trouble." Willow nodded, but as she left the saloon, she couldn't forget those eyes. They didn't match the rumors at all. The bell above the door jingled as Willow entered Jenkins' general store. The familiar sense of coffee, leather, and dried goods filled her nostrils, reminding her of her father's store back in St. Louis before the fire had taken it and him from her. "Uncle George," she called. A gray-haired man emerged from the back room, spectacles perched on his nose. His face brightened when he saw her. "Willow, my goodness, you're early. Wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." He hurried forward to embrace her. "The stage made good time," she explained, returning his hug. "It's good to see you, Uncle. Let me look at you," he said, stepping back. "You've grown into quite the young woman. 24 now, aren't you?" 25 next month, she corrected with a smile. George's expression sobered. "I was sorry to hear about your mother's passing after losing your father and then her. Well, I'm glad you've come to stay." Willow swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. Her mother's death from influenza 6 months ago had left her truly alone, save for Uncle George, her father's brother, whom she hadn't seen since childhood. "I appreciate the opportunity," she said, straightening her shoulders. I'm ready to work, George chuckled. That's the Jenkins spirit. Come on upstairs, I've prepared a room for you. As they climbed the narrow staircase to the living quarters above the store, Willow couldn't help asking, Uncle, do you know a man named Zane Maddox? George paused mid-step. Maddox, why do you ask? I saw him at the saloon when I arrived. There was a fight, her uncle sighed. Zane Maddox is complicated. Town sees him one way, but he shook his head. Best to form your own opinions, Willow. Now let me show you your room. The subject was clearly closed, but Willow's curiosity was only kindled further. What did her uncle know about the infamous Zane Maddox that others didn't? 3 days later, Willow had settled into a routine at the store. She enjoyed the work, arranging merchandise, keeping the ledgers, and meeting the townspeople who came to shop and gossip. Many were curious about the city girl who had come to live with old George, and Willow found herself repeating her story countless times. It was late afternoon when the bell chimed and a tall figure blocked the sunlight from the doorway. Willow looked up from the shelf she was stocking and nearly dropped the can of peaches in her hand. Zane Maddox stepped into the store, removing his hat in a gesture that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. Without the chaos of the saloon brawl, she could see him more clearly, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with strong, tanned features weathered by sun and wind. A thin scar ran along his jaw and his dark hair curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. "Afternoon," he said, nodding to Willow. His voice was indeed quiet with a slight rasp to it. George around. Before she could answer, her uncle emerged from the storeroom. "Zane. Didn't expect you for another few days. Sheriff finally let you back in town." To Willow's surprise, the two men exchanged a friendly handshake. There was none of the tension she would have expected given the stories she'd heard. "Got my supplies ordered?" Zane asked. "Right here." George gestured to several crates by the counter. "And I've got that medicine you wanted for old Bessie." "Much obliged." Zane began examining the supplies, checking items against a list he pulled from his pocket. Willow tried not to stare, but curiosity got the better of her. This was not the cold-blooded killer of the rumors. He moved with purpose but no aggression, and when he spoke to her uncle, there was respect in his tone. "Zane," George said, "this is my niece, Willow. She's come to help me with the store." Zane turned to her, and those blue eyes met hers again. "Miss Jenkins," he inclined his head slightly. "Welcome to Silvercreek." "Thank you, Mr. Maddox." She was proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Willow's from St. Louis," George continued. "Been running her family's store there until recently." Something shifted in Zane's expression. Interest, perhaps. "City stores and country stores are different animals," he said. "How are you finding it?" "The principles are the same," Willow replied, finding her voice. "Though I admit I've never had to order quite so much feed and ammunition before." A ghost of a smile touched Zane's lips, transforming his face in a way that made Willow's heart skip a beat. "I imagine not." As he turned back to his supplies, Willow noticed something unexpected. Zane's hands, as he checked off items on his list, were trembling slightly. Those large, capable hands, which according to rumor had dispatched countless men, shook almost imperceptibly as he held the pencil. Zane must have felt her gaze, for he quickly put the list away and reached for his wallet. "What do I owe you, George?" As the men concluded their transaction, Willow busied herself with the peaches again, mind racing. Why would a man like Zane Maddox have trembling hands? And why did no one mention that in all their fearsome tales, Zane collected his supplies, loading them onto a wagon parked outside? When he returned for the last crate, he paused by the counter where Willow was arranging a display of ribbons. "Miss Jenkins," he said quietly, "would you mind adding a package of these to my bill?" He placed a handful of peppermint sticks on the counter. "Of course," she replied, wrapping them in paper. "Much obliged." He hesitated, then added, "They're not for me. There's a family of homesteaders near my property. Kids haven't had sweets in months." Before she could respond, he collected the package and his final crate and was gone, leaving Willow staring after him in confusion. Candy for children, a friendly relationship with her uncle, trembling hands, none of it matched the Zane Maddox of rumor. Interesting man, isn't he? George said, coming to stand beside her. "The stories about him, they don't seem to fit." Willow admitted. Her uncle nodded thoughtfully. People see what they expect to see, Willow. Zane keeps to himself, which makes folks nervous. And yes, he can handle himself in a fight had to, coming up the way he did, but there's more to him than that. What do you mean? George sighed. Not my story to tell, but I will say this: in 5 years, I've never known Zane Maddox to start a fight, though he certainly finishes them. And he's the only rancher around who pays his bills on time every time. Willow watched through the window as Zane's wagon disappeared down the dusty street, and the trembling in his hands, her uncle's expression grew serious. War leaves marks on a man, Willow. Some you can see, some you can't. The war, of course, Zane would have been the right age to have fought in the war between the states. The revelation only deepened the mystery surrounding him. Now, George said briskly, let's close up for supper. Mrs. Holloway across the street invited us for pot roast, and she'll be offended if we're late. As they secured the store for the evening, Willow found her thoughts lingering on Zane Maddox and his trembling hands. Despite herself, she wanted to know more about the man behind the fearsome reputation. The next week passed in a blur of work. Willow quickly proved her worth in the store, reorganizing merchandise for better display and suggesting new products that might appeal to the ladies of Silvercreek. George was delighted with her ideas and gave her increasing responsibility for ordering and bookkeeping. Willow was checking inventory one afternoon when the door burst open, admitting a wild-eyed young woman with a baby in her arms. "Help," she gasped. "Please, is Dr. Miller here, or the sheriff?" Willow rushed forward. "What's wrong?" "Rustlers," the woman panted. "At our farm. My husband, they shot him. He sent me to town for help." George emerged from the back. "Sarah, what's happened?" "Rustlers at the Palmer place," Willow explained quickly. "Her husband's been shot." "The sheriff's out at the Donovan Ranch," George said grimly. "And Doc Miller went to deliver the Cooper baby this morning." "Please," Sarah begged, bouncing the fussing infant. "Tom's bleeding bad." "I'll go," said a deep voice from the doorway. Zane Maddox stood there, expression grim. "Where exactly is he, Sarah?" "In the barn. He was trying to keep them from the cattle." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "There were 3 of them." Zane nodded sharply. "George, send someone for the doctor when he returns. Tell him to come to the Palmer place." He turned to leave. "Wait," Willow called, grabbing her shawl from behind the counter. "I'm coming with you." "Miss Jenkins, I have nursing experience," she said firmly. "From the hospital in St. Louis. If he's badly wounded, he'll need help before the doctor arrives." Zane hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Bring whatever supplies you have." Minutes later, they were galloping out of town, Willow clinging to the saddle of a borrowed horse, a bag of medical supplies bouncing against her hip. She'd never ridden so fast and was grateful for childhood summers spent at her aunt's farm in Illinois. Zane rode slightly ahead, his posture alert but not tense. He handled his horse with easy confidence, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was keeping pace. "Have you done this before?" she called over the pounding of hooves. "Too many times," he replied grimly. They reached the Palmer homestead in 20 minutes, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral. The door of the barn was ajar, and Zane dismounted in a fluid motion, drawing his revolver. "Stay behind me," he instructed, moving toward the barn with a caution that spoke of experience. Inside, they found Tom Palmer propped against a hay bale, a bloodied cloth pressed to his shoulder. His face was pale with pain and blood loss. "Maddox," he gasped. "They took half my herd." "That can wait," Zane said, holstering his weapon and kneeling beside the wounded man. "Miss Jenkins has medical training." Willow was already opening her bag. "Let me see, Mr. Palmer." The bullet had gone through his shoulder, missing any vital organs but leaving a nasty wound that was still bleeding freely. Willow cleaned it as best she could with carbolic solution, then packed it with sterile gauze and bandaged it tightly. "This will hold until the doctor arrives," she said, "but you've lost a lot of blood." Throughout her ministrations, Zane had stood guard at the barn door, watching for any sign of the rustlers' return. Now he approached and crouched beside Palmer. "Did you recognize any of them?" he asked quietly. Palmer shook his head. "Wore bandanas." But the leader, tall fellow with a limp, mentioned heading for Broken Ridge. Zane's expression hardened. Barton's gang, they've been hitting small ranches all through the territory. My cattle, Palmer groaned. Everything we have is in those beasts. I'll find them, Zane said, the quiet promise in his voice more convincing than any shouted vow. Palmer grabbed Zane's wrist with surprising strength. Don't go alone. Barton's gang is 6 men at least. I won't engage them directly, just track them, then get the sheriff. Zane stood, turning to Willow. Can you stay with him until the doctor comes? Willow nodded. Of course. Thank you. The simple words carried genuine gratitude. He hesitated, then added, if I'm not back by nightfall, tell Sheriff Roberts where I've gone. Before she could respond, he was striding from the barn. Through the open door, Willow watched him check his saddle and weapons with methodical precision. His hands, she noted, were steady now. Whatever caused the trembling seemed absent in moments of crisis. As he mounted, he caught her watching and gave her a nod that somehow conveyed both reassurance and farewell. Then he was gone in a cloud of dust, riding toward Broken Ridge. Dr. Miller arrived an hour later and praised Willow's work with the wound. Clean job, Miss Jenkins. You've had training. I volunteered at Mercy Hospital in St. Louis during the influenza outbreak, she explained, helping him prepare fresh bandages. We could use someone with your skills around here. The doctor glanced up from his patient. Where's Maddox? Sarah said he came with you. He went after the rustlers. Said they were Barton's gang. Miller's expression grew concerned. Alone, that's not wise, even for Zane. By the time they transported Palmer to his cabin and settled him in bed, the sun was sinking toward the horizon. Sarah, cradling her baby, gripped Willow's hand. Thank you for coming. And please, if you see Mr. Maddox, tell him we're grateful. Tom would have bled to death without help. Willow promised she would, then accepted the doctor's offer of a ride back to town. As they traveled, she found herself scanning the landscape for any sign of Zane returning. You're worried about him, Dr. Miller observed. I hardly know him, Willow replied, embarrassed at being so transparent. But yes, I am. Zane's capable, the doctor said. More capable than most, but he's not invincible, though sometimes I think he believes he is. You know him well. Miller nodded. Treated him when he first came to town. He was in bad shape, not just physically. The war, Willow guessed, that and what came after. The doctor glanced at her. The tremors in his hands, you've noticed them? Yes. They come and go, worse when he's tired or... When the memories are strong, Miller sighed. The body remembers trauma, Miss Jenkins, even when the mind tries to forget. They rode in silence for a while, Willow absorbing this information, fitting it into the puzzle that was Zane Maddox. The rumors about him, she began. Mostly nonsense, Miller interrupted. Has he killed men? Yes, in war and after. Has he killed 20 men in cold blood? Absolutely not. He shook his head. People fear what they don't understand, and they don't understand a man who carries his pain as quietly as Zane does. When they reached town, the sheriff was just returning from his own call. After hearing their story, he immediately organized a posse to ride at first light. Maddox is a fool to go alone, Roberts declared, though Willow detected more concern than criticism in his tone. Those Barton boys are vicious. Will you go tonight? Willow asked. Roberts shook his head. Can't track in the dark, and we'd likely miss him completely. Best wait till morning. That night, Willow found sleep elusive. She sat by her bedroom window, watching the silent street below, wondering if Zane was safe, if he'd found the rustlers, if he'd kept his word not to confront them alone. She barely knew the man, yet she couldn't deny the strange connection. She felt a pull toward the contradiction between his fearsome reputation and the reality of his quiet strength, his trembling hands, his kindness toward children. Dawn was breaking when a commotion in the street drew her attention. Throwing a shawl over her nightdress, she hurried to the window. Below, a small procession was moving toward the doctor's office, 2 horses, one ridden by Zane, the other carrying what appeared to be an injured man. Without hesitation, Willow threw on a dress, pinned up her hair, and rushed downstairs and out into the street. By the time she reached the doctor's office, Miller was helping Zane lower the second rider, a young man with blood soaking his trousers, onto a stretcher. Willow, doctor. Miller acknowledged her. Good timing. I could use your assistance. Inside, as they cut away the young man's pants to reveal a bullet wound in his thigh, Miller explained, "This is Cal Barton, youngest of the Barton brothers." "Found them at their camp near Broken Ridge," Zane said from where he stood by the door, hat in hands that were indeed trembling again. "Wasn't planning to engage, but Cal here was on sentry duty, caught me watching them." "You shot him?" Willow asked, pressing clean gauze to the wound. "No, madam," Cal groaned. "My own damn gun went off when I fell." "I couldn't leave him," Zane continued. "The others had already moved on with the cattle. He would have bled out." Willow stared at him in amazement. He'd brought back one of the very outlaws he'd gone to track not as a prisoner, but as a man in need of medical help. "Sheriff's gathered a posse," she told him. "They're riding out at first light, which is about now. Good, I know where the gang was headed. With luck, they'll catch them before they cross into the next territory." As Dr. Miller worked on extracting the bullet from Cal's leg, Willow assisted with steady hands, occasionally stealing glances at Zane. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and dust coating his clothes, yet he remained upright, waiting. "Zane," Miller said without looking up from his work, "go get some rest. I've got this handled. I'll wait for the sheriff." "I'll send word when he returns," Willow offered. "You look dead on your feet." A ghost of a smile touched Zane's lips. "I've looked worse." But after a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Thank you, Miss Jenkins, I'd be obliged." As he turned to leave, Miller called after him, "And Zane, good work bringing the boy in. Not many would have." Zane paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning light. "Every man deserves a chance to change his path, Doc, even a Barton." Then he was gone, walking with the slightly stiff gait of a man who had spent too many hours in the saddle. Later that afternoon, after the sheriff and his posse had returned successfully with the stolen cattle and the remaining Barton gang members, Willow found herself telling George about Zane's actions. "Doesn't surprise me," her uncle said, sorting through mail behind the counter. "Zane's got a strong sense of right and wrong, but he also believes in redemption, maybe because he sought it himself." "What do you mean?" George hesitated. "Like I said before, not my story to tell, but..." He sighed. "Zane came here looking for a fresh start. Most folks never gave him a chance to have one, what with the rumors that followed him." "What rumors?" "That he'd ridden with Quantrill's raiders during the war, that he'd been an outlaw after." Willow's eyes widened. Quantrill's raiders were infamous Confederate guerrillas known for their brutality, especially in the Lawrence Massacre of 1863. Were the rumors true? Parts, maybe. The war forced terrible choices on young men. George looked at her steadily. "But the man I know pays his debts, helps his neighbors, and has never drawn his gun except in defense." Willow thought of Zane's trembling hands and the careful gentleness with which he'd treated both Palmer and young Cal Barton. Whatever his past, the man she was coming to know seemed to carry both strength and sorrow in equal measure. The bell above the door jingled, and Sheriff Roberts entered. "Afternoon, George, Miss Jenkins. Thought you'd want to know we recovered all of Palmer's cattle and most of what was taken from the Duncan place last month." "And the Bartons?" George asked. "Locked up tight. All except the youngest. Doc says he needs a few days before he can be moved to the jail." Roberts shook his head. "Strange thing, Maddox bringing him in like that. Any other man would have left him or finished him off." "Zane's not any other man," George said simply. "No," the sheriff agreed. "He surely isn't. Speaking of, is he around? Wanted to thank him for the tracking. We'd never have caught up to them so quickly without his directions." "Haven't seen him since this morning," Willow said. "He was heading home to rest, I believe." Roberts nodded. "Well, if you see him, tell him I said he did good work. And that drinks at the saloon are on me next time he's in town." After the sheriff left, George turned to Willow with a knowing look. "You're developing quite an interest in our Mr. Maddox." Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm merely curious about the discrepancy between his reputation and his actions." George hummed, clearly unconvinced. "Well, curiosity's a powerful thing, sometimes leads to understanding." 2 days later, Willow was arranging a new shipment of fabric when the store door opened to admit Zane. He looked rested, his face freshly shaved, wearing a clean shirt under his usual leather vest. "Miss Jenkins," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I was hoping to find you here." Willow's heart quickened inexplicably. "Mr. Maddox, how can I help you?" "I wanted to thank you for your assistance at the Palmer place. Doc Miller says Tom is recovering well, thanks in part to your quick action." "I was glad to help," she replied, suddenly aware of how close he was standing, of the clean scent of soap that clung to him. Zane glanced around the empty store. "Is George around?" "He's making deliveries. Did you need to see him?" "Actually, I came to see you." Zane shifted his weight, and Willow noticed the slight tremor in his right hand as he set his hat on the counter. "I was wondering if you might consider joining me for supper at the hotel dining room tomorrow evening." The invitation surprised her so completely that she merely stared at him for a moment. Zane Maddox, the subject of so many fearsome tales, was asking her to dine with him. His expression grew uncertain at her silence, and he quickly added, "Of course, if you'd rather not." "No," Willow interrupted. "I mean, yes, I'd be pleased to join you." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over mountains, sudden and breathtaking. 7 o'clock. 7 would be perfect. After he left, Willow pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, wondering what on earth had possessed her to accept. A small-town general store clerk dining with the most notorious man in the territory. It would set tongues wagging from one end of Silvercreek to the other. Yet the prospect filled her with inexplicable excitement. There was more to Zane Maddox than met the eye, more than the rumors, more than even the glimpses of decency she'd witnessed. And something in her wanted desperately to discover what lay beneath the surface of those troubled blue eyes. When George returned, she told him about the invitation, half expecting him to object. Instead, he smiled broadly. "Good," he said. "Very good. You're not concerned about his reputation," George chuckled. "Willow, I trust Zane Maddox more than most men in this town." "And I trust your judgment, too," he patted her hand. "Just be prepared, not everyone will see it that way." His warning proved prophetic the next evening. As Willow entered the hotel dining room on Zane's arm, conversation faltered and heads turned. She felt the weight of curious and disapproving stares as they were seated at a corner table. "I should have warned you," Zane said quietly. "I don't often dine in public. Because of how people react to you," he nodded. "It's usually simpler to keep to myself." "Then why invite me here?" She asked directly. Zane met her gaze steadily. "Because sometimes simple isn't what we need, Miss Jenkins." The waiter approached, visibly nervous as he took their order. When he departed, Willow leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Maddox, Zane, please." "Zane," she amended, liking the feel of his name on her lips. "May I ask you something directly? I'd expect nothing less from you. The rumors about you, about your past, are they true?" He didn't look away, though something flickered in his eyes, pain, perhaps, or resignation. "Some, not all." "Which ones?" Zane was silent for a moment, his right hand resting on the table, trembling slightly. When he spoke, his voice was low but clear. "I rode with Quantrill for a time during the war. I was 17, angry, and Missouri was burning. My family's farm had been raided by Jayhawkers. My father killed. It seemed like justice at the time." Willow's throat tightened at the raw honesty in his voice. "I was with them for 8 months, not at Lawrence, I thank God for that, but for other raids, things I can't undo." He looked down at his trembling hand. "Then came Centralia." Willow had heard of the Centralia massacre, another bloody episode where Quantrill's men had killed unarmed Union soldiers. "I couldn't do it anymore after that. Deserted. Spent the rest of the war trying to make amends in my way. And after the war, drifted, worked ranches. Got into trouble sometimes when the past caught up with me." His eyes met hers again. "But I never was an outlaw, despite what some believe. Never robbed, never killed except in self-defense. And the trembling in your hands," his mouth tightened, "started after Centralia. Gets worse when I'm tired or when the memories come back strong." "War neurosis," Willow said softly. "I saw it in soldiers at the hospital. Doc Miller calls it the same." Zane flexed his fingers. "Makes it hard to do fine work sometimes, but I manage." Their food arrived and they ate in silence for a few minutes. Willow processed what he'd told her, trying to reconcile it with the man sitting across from her, a man who had ridden with killers yet had risked himself to help Tom Palmer and even young Cal Barton. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what? For telling me the truth. It can't be easy to speak of." "It's not," he admitted, "but I wanted you to know before—" He hesitated. "Before what?" "Before I ask if I might call on you again." Willow's heart leaped, surprising her with its eagerness. She had come to Silvercreek seeking a fresh start, never expecting to find herself drawn to a man like Zane Maddox. Yet here she was, caring nothing for the stares of the other diners, wanting only to know more of this complex, contradictory man. "I'd like that," she said simply. The relief that washed over his features was almost painful to witness. "Even knowing what I was, it's who you are now that matters to me," Willow replied. "And from what I've seen, that's a man trying to do right despite a past that haunts him." Zane reached across the table, his trembling hand covering hers in a touch so gentle it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, Willow." In the weeks that followed, Silvercreek buzzed with gossip about the unlikely courtship between George Jenkins' niece and the notorious Zane Maddox. Willow bore the whispers with dignity, caring little for the opinions of those who judged without knowing. Zane called on her regularly, sometimes taking her for rides to show her the beauty of the Colorado countryside, other times simply sitting on the store's back porch, talking as twilight deepened around them. She learned about his ranch, modest but well-run, with a small herd of cattle and 2 loyal ranch hands who had been with him since he bought the place. In turn, she told him about her life in St. Louis, about losing her father in the fire, about nursing during the influenza outbreak that had eventually claimed her mother. He listened with an intensity that made her feel truly heard, perhaps for the first time in her life. "You're brave," he told her one evening as they watched the sunset from a hillside overlooking his ranch. "Braver than me." "I don't think so," she disagreed, watching the golden light play across his features. "It takes courage to start over. To face the past every day and still try to build something better." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Isn't it?" Zane was silent for a long moment, absently stroking the neck of his horse, which was grazing nearby. "I came here looking for quiet," he finally said. "A place where I could keep to myself and not have to explain, not have to remember. And did you find it, for a while?" His eyes found hers. "Then you arrived and made me want more than quiet." The simple declaration sent warmth coursing through her. Before she could respond, he reached for her hand, his own trembling slightly as always. "Your hands," she said softly, covering his with her other one. "Do they ever hurt, sometimes, when the weather changes, or when I've been thinking too much about the past?" He glanced down at their joined hands. "Does it bother you, the tremor?" "No," she said truthfully. "It reminds me that strength comes in different forms." His expression softened, and for a moment Willow thought he might kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and turned back to the sunset, a comfortable silence falling between them. It was on a stormy afternoon in late summer when everything changed. Willow was alone in the store, George having gone to Denver for supplies. The bell jingled and she looked up from her ledger, expecting a customer seeking shelter from the rain. Instead, 3 men entered, strangers with the hard eyes and confident swagger of men accustomed to intimidation. The leader, a tall man with a pockmarked face, smiled without warmth. "Afternoon, miss. This Jenkins store?" "It is," Willow replied, instinctively wary. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" "Heard there's a man named Maddox in these parts," the leader said, moving toward the counter while his companions spread out in the store. "Zane Maddox." Willow's pulse quickened. "I couldn't say." The man's smile widened, revealing a gold tooth. "Now, that's interesting, because word is you and Maddox are quite friendly." He leaned on the counter. "I'm an old acquaintance, you might say, from Missouri," understanding dawned cold and sharp. These men were from Zane's past, perhaps former raiders, perhaps people who had suffered at their hands. "Mr. Maddox isn't here," she said evenly. "If you have business with him, I suggest you try his ranch west of town." The man with the gold tooth shook his head. "Oh, we'll get to that. But first, we thought we'd leave him a message." His hand shot out, grasping Willow's wrist. A very personal message. Fear spiked through her, but before she could react, the store door burst open again. Zane stood in the doorway, rain-soaked and grim, his right hand hovering near his holstered revolver. "Let her go, Delaney," he said quietly. The man Delaney smiled widely. "Well, if it isn't the deserter himself, saved us the trouble of hunting you down." "This is between us," Zane said, stepping into the store. "Let the lady go." "The lady," Delaney mocked, still gripping Willow's wrist, "has been keeping interesting company. Don't you tell her what you did to my brother." "Your brother died at Centralia," Zane replied steadily. "Killed by Union soldiers who ambushed us after the raid. I had nothing to do with his death." "You were there," Delaney snarled. "Then you ran, turned yellow when the fighting got tough." "I left because I couldn't stomach the killing anymore." Zane's voice remained calm, though Willow could see the tension in his frame. "And I'm sorry about your brother, truly, but this won't bring him back." For a moment, the only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and the heavy breathing of the men. Then Delaney laughed harshly. "Always were good with words, weren't you, Maddox? Good at justifying." His grip on Willow's wrist tightened painfully. "But words won't save you or her today." Everything happened at once. Delaney yanked Willow against him, using her as a shield. His companions drew their weapons, and Zane's hands didn't tremble at all as he drew his revolver with lightning speed. "Last chance, Delaney," he warned. Delaney pressed a knife to Willow's throat. "Drop the gun or she bleeds." Time seemed to stop. Willow met Zane's eyes, saw the calculation there, the fear for her, and something else, a deep, resolute calm. Then Zane did something unexpected. He lowered his gun slowly and placed it on the floor. "There," he said softly. "Now let her go." Delaney smiled triumphantly. "I knew you'd gone soft," he gestured to his men. "Take him." As the two men moved toward Zane, Willow acted on instinct. She drove her elbow hard into Delaney's ribs, simultaneously twisting away from the knife. He cursed, his grip loosening just enough for her to break free. Zane moved with astonishing speed for a man who had just surrendered his weapon. Before Delaney's men could reach him, he'd snatched a heavy ledger from the counter and hurled it at one, then tackled the other in a flying leap that sent them both crashing into a display of canned goods. Willow scrambled behind the counter, reaching for the shotgun George kept there. As she brought it up, Delaney lunged for her, knife raised. She fired without hesitation. The blast knocked Delaney backward, the knife clattering from his hand. He wasn't dead. The range had been too great for a fatal wound, but he lay groaning on the floor, clutching his shoulder. Zane had subdued one man and was grappling with the other. The second man had a revolver, which discharged with a deafening report as they struggled. Zane staggered but didn't fall, instead delivering a powerful blow that rendered his opponent unconscious. Then, suddenly, it was over. 3 men lay on the floor of the store, 2 unconscious, 1 wounded. Zane stood amidst the chaos, breathing hard, a dark stain spreading across his left side. "You're hit," Willow gasped, setting aside the shotgun and rushing to him. "It's nothing," he said, though his face had gone pale beneath its tan. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine, but you need a doctor." She pressed her hand to his side, feeling the warm wetness of blood. "Sit down before you fall down." For once, he didn't argue, sinking onto a chair as Sheriff Roberts and several townsmen, drawn by the gunshot, burst into the store. While the sheriff secured the prisoners, Willow tore strips from a bolt of muslin to make a temporary bandage. Zane watched her work, his eyes never leaving her face. "You saved my life," she told him, tying off the bandage. "Seems to me you saved your own," he replied, a hint of pride in his voice despite the pain. "And mine as well." "We saved each other," Willow corrected, her hands steady despite the fear and adrenaline still coursing through her. "That's what matters." Dr. Miller arrived and insisted on taking Zane to his office. The bullet had grazed his ribs, painful but not life-threatening. While the doctor worked, Willow gave her account to Sheriff Roberts, who looked both impressed and troubled. 3 men from Missouri, the sheriff mused, looking to settle an old score. From the war, Willow confirmed. They blamed Zane for something that happened at a place called Centralia. Roberts nodded slowly. Centralia massacre, bad business. He studied her face. Did Maddox tell you about his past? Yes, she said firmly, all of it, and you still. The sheriff trailed off, gesturing vaguely. Care for him, Willow finished. Yes, I do, Robert sighed. Well, Miss Jenkins, you're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've met, maybe both. But there was a glint of respect in his eyes. For what it's worth, I've been sheriff here 5 years, and Maddox has never been anything but law-abiding. Whatever he did in the war, he's been trying to make right ever since, best I can tell. I know, Willow said simply. Later, when Miller had finished treating Zane's wound, Willow sat beside his bed in the small room behind the doctor's office. You should go home, Zane told her, his voice rough with exhaustion. Get some rest. I'm staying, she replied, taking his hand in hers. It was trembling again, worse than she'd ever seen. Does it always get this bad after violence? He nodded wearily. The tremors started after Centralia. Some days I can barely hold a cup. He looked at their joined hands. I never wanted you to see the ugliness of my past, Willow. It's not ugly to defend yourself or others, she said, and your past made you who you are. A broken man with shaking hands and a reputation that draws trouble. A good man, she corrected gently. One who chose a different path when he saw where the old one led. One who's brave enough to face each day despite the ghosts that follow him. Zane's fingers tightened around hers. When I saw Delaney holding you, I thought, he broke off, his voice thick with emotion. I couldn't bear the thought of my past hurting you. It didn't, Willow assured him. I'm right here. They sat in silence for a while, the comfort of touch saying what words couldn't. Finally, Zane spoke again, his voice soft but determined. I love you, Willow Jenkins. Have almost from the moment you looked at me across that saloon. Didn't plan it, didn't want it, but there it is. Her heart swelled at the simple declaration. And I love you, Zane Maddox, despite the rumors or perhaps because I saw beyond them. He raised their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her fingers. I don't have much to offer. Just a small ranch and a man with a complicated past. It's more than enough, she assured him. As long as that man is you. 3 days later, Zane was released from the doctor's care, though ordered to take it easy while his wound healed. Delaney and his men were in jail awaiting trial for attempted murder and assault. George, who had returned from Denver to find his store in disarray, and his niece in love, took the whole situation with remarkable calm. Always thought you two would suit, he told Willow as they cleaned up the last of the mess from the fight. Both of you looking for a fresh start, both stronger than you know. You're not concerned about his past, George snorted. Girl, we all have pasts. It's what we do with our futures that counts. He paused in his sweeping. He's asked my blessing, you know. Willow's heart skipped. For what? Don't play innocent with me, young lady, for courting you properly with intentions. George smiled at her shocked expression. Said he wants to do right by you, whatever that takes. And what did you say? Willow asked, barely breathing. Said he'd better or he'd answer to me. George chuckled. Then I gave him my blessing. Man deserves happiness, same as you do. The autumn brought golden light to the Colorado highlands, and a rhythm to Willow's life that felt both new and somehow as if it had always been meant to be. She continued working at the store, but also spent time at Zane's ranch, learning its operations and getting to know his small staff, who clearly respected their boss despite, or perhaps because of the tremor in his hands that sometimes made the simplest tasks a struggle. Zane courted her with an old-fashioned formality that touched her deeply, bringing wildflowers when he came to town, taking her on picnics in the foothills, reading poetry by lamplight on the store's back porch. The gossip about them gradually subsided as the townspeople grew accustomed to seeing them together, and as the story of how they had faced Delaney and his men spread. It was on a crisp October evening, with the aspen trees blazing gold against the mountains, that Zane asked her to marry him. They were riding along a ridge overlooking his ranch, the setting sun painting the land in hues of amber and rose. I know it hasn't been long, he said, reining his horse to a stop and turning to face her. But I also know my own heart, Willow, and it's yours completely. He dismounted and helped her down from her horse, then knelt before her, his hands steady in that moment holding a simple gold ring. "I can't promise an easy life," he said, looking up at her with those blue eyes that had first captured her attention. "My past will always be there. The tremors may get worse with age, but I can promise to love you every day, to build something good with you if you'll have me." Tears blurred Willow's vision as she looked down at this man so different from the fearsome figure she'd first glimpsed in a saloon brawl, yet exactly the same in all the ways that mattered. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Zane Maddox, I will marry you." His smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, sudden and transformative. When he rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss was tender yet passionate, conveying promises beyond words. They were married in November in the small church in Silvercreek. The ceremony was simple, attended by George, Dr. Miller, Sheriff Roberts, the Palmers, and a handful of others who had come to respect both bride and groom. Afterward, as they drove toward the ranch in a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by the ladies of the town, Willow nestled against Zane's side, feeling a contentment she had never known was possible. "Happy, Mrs. Maddox?" he asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Completely," she replied, watching his hands on the reins steady today in this moment of joy. "And you, more than I ever thought I'd be." He glanced down at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You know what I thought the first time I saw you, behind that piano in the saloon?" "What?" "That you were too good, too fine for a place like Silvercreek," he chuckled. "Never imagined you'd look twice at a man like me." "I looked more than twice," she teased, then grew serious. "I saw you, Zane, not the rumors, not the past, you." He pulled the wagon to a stop at a bend in the road where the valley opened up before them, his ranch visible in the distance, their home now. The late afternoon sun gilded the landscape, promising peace after so much turbulence. "I love you, Willow Maddox," he said softly, gathering her close. "With everything I am." "And I love you," she replied, resting her hands over his, feeling the slight tremor that would always be part of him, part of their life together. Trembling hands and all. As they continued toward home, toward their future, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had come to Silvercreek seeking a new beginning, and had found more than she'd ever dreamed, not with the rough, hard man of rumors, but with a gentle soul whose strength lay in his capacity for change, for forgiveness, for love. And as for Zane's trembling hands, they would always serve as a reminder of the cost of violence, the price of war. But they would also remind them both of the power of redemption and of the surprising gentleness that can exist within even the most wounded hearts. Spring came to the Colorado Highlands, bringing new life to the land and to the Maddox Ranch. Willow stood on the porch, watching as Zane worked with a young colt in the corral, his patience evident even from a distance. His hands trembled as they always did, but the colt didn't mind, responding to the gentleness in his touch rather than the steadiness. A year had passed since she'd first arrived in Silvercreek, a year of profound changes. The general store now belonged to her and Zane, George having decided to retire and move to Denver to be near his daughter. They'd hired a manager to run it day to day, allowing Willow to split her time between town and ranch. The ranch itself was thriving. With Willow's head for business complementing Zane's knowledge of cattle, they'd expanded their herd and improved the property. They'd built a new, larger cabin to replace the modest one Zane had lived in alone, with a wide porch perfect for watching sunsets and a nursery awaiting the child that would arrive in summer. As Willow cradled her growing belly, she thought about the rumors that had once defined Zane in the eyes of the town. They had faded now, replaced by a respect earned through consistent integrity and quiet strength. When the tremors in his hands were particularly bad, neighbors came to help with tasks that required steadiness, without comment or pity, just the matter-of-fact assistance of a community that had finally accepted one of its own. Zane released the colt and looked up, catching sight of her on the porch. His face lit with a smile that still made her heart race, and he walked toward her with long strides. "You should be resting," he chided gently as he climbed the steps. "I'm perfectly fine," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Just watching you work your magic with that colt. No magic to it, just patience." He placed his hand on her rounded belly, a look of wonder crossing his face as he felt the baby kick, strong like his mother. "Or her father," Willow countered, covering his trembling hand with her own. Zane chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Either way, luckiest child in the territory, having you for a mother." As they stood together on the porch of the home they'd built, looking out over the land they tended, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had come west seeking refuge from loss, never expecting to find such profound love. And Zane had sought solitude to escape his past, only to discover that healing came not from isolation but from connection. "What are you thinking about?" Zane asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About rumors and reality," she replied. "About how people can be so wrong about each other." "And sometimes so right," he added, drawing her closer. "Like you were about me." Willow smiled up at him. "I just saw past the surface to the man beneath. The man with the trembling hands," he said wryly. "The man with the gentle heart," she corrected, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "That's what matters. That's what always mattered." As the sun began to set, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. The future stretched before them, rich with promise, a future built not despite Zane's past, but because of how he had chosen to rise above it. And Willow, who had once thought she was seeking merely a quiet life in a small town, had found instead an epic love story written in the most unexpected of places. In the trembling hands of a man who had learned that true strength lies not in violence, but in the courage to be gentle in a harsh world.